Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
I'm Dan Rundy. I hold the Schreier Chair here at CSIS. I'm so grateful all of you are joining us today to talk about the role of culture in the context of the peace negotiations with Afghanistan. We've got three really thoughtful speakers who are going to help us unpack this really interesting and important topic. We've done a lot of work at CSIS on culture and the creative economy. Why does that matter? Well, it's a source of jobs and growth. It's a source of identity. It's a source of connection with the past. It's potentially a source of healing and unity. And it's also a source of future jobs I think we're going to talk about all these issues shortly. And it's something perhaps that doesn't get enough attention or appreciation in sort of foreign policy think tank discussions or in conversations about global development. We've done a lot of work, thanks to our friends in Taiwan, on these issues, looking primarily in Asia, but also in Latin America. But I was particularly grateful to my friends at Arch, Cheryl Bernard in particular, who's the founder of Arch, to bring this idea to us. We could not have done this without our friends at Arch, Sophia Schultz, who's with Arch as well. They helped us convene and find the right speakers for this and help us think about how to approach this the right way. So Cheryl, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. Sophia, thank you very much for your partnership. I really appreciate it. We've got three amazing and interesting speakers today to help us talk about this interesting topic as it relates to Afghanistan. So we have Irina Bokova, who is, her current title is board member for Arch International, but that's not really what her role is. I mean, she was also, before that, she had the top job at Unesco, the UN Agency for Education and Culture, for 8 years. And she's really someone who's done some amazing work on illicit trafficking of antiquities related to the financing of terrorism, and she also has worked on issues of affirming the link between the protection of heritage and peace and security. We then also have Ambassador, we have Ambassador Adela Raz, who is currently Afghanistan's ambassador to the United Nations. But prior to that, the ambassador she was the first female deputy spokeswoman and director of communications and she's had a number of important posts in the Afghan government. So I'm quite grateful that Ambassador Raz is with us. And she represented the president of the country, and she's also been Deputy Minister for Economic Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Ambassador Raz, for being here. We also have Luis Monreal, who is with us, who is the General Manager of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. I was so pleased to make Luis's acquaintance, given that he held Spanish nationality, and Spain is a country very, very close to my heart. And so I really am so pleased, Luis, to make your acquaintance. Luis is a conservation specialist, art historian, and archaeologist. I didn't realize we were going to have a real-life Spanish Indiana Jones with us, but I think, Luis, you may be a Spanish version of Indiana Jones. And it's led a number of various archaeological missions to Nubia, Sudan, Egypt, and Morocco, just like in the movies. He's the author of several books and numerous articles on art and archaeology. So let me first start with Irina Bokova, who's the board member for Arch International. Irina, I'm so grateful that you're with us today. And, I guess the question I'd have for you is could you first start talking about, there's been a number of actors let's first talk about the issue of culture as it relates to peace and security, and preservation as it relates to peace and security. You've worked on these issues, Irina, at your time in UNESCO. You do this now with Arch International. Make the case for why culture and cultural preservation matters in the context of peace and security.
Thank you very much, Dan, for this kind presentation. Let me say that I'm very honored to be on this panel with Ambassador Adela Raz, being with us here with my very good friend, Luis Monreal, and also to thank Cheryl Bernard, who initiated this important conversation, and to say that I have been supporting ARCH since I stepped down as Director General of UNESCO, because I do believe that we share the common passion for heritage protection, but also the link between heritage, culture, and peace. And it goes without saying, you will not be surprised, during my 8 years at UNESCO, I have seen the power of culture and heritage. I have seen the shocking destruction of heritage. I have seen the rise of violent extremism in Mali, with the destruction of the mausoleums in Iraq, in Syria, in some other parts of the world. I have seen how destruction of heritage goes with illicit trafficking and also with the financing of terrorism. I have seen how they destroy communities, how they are going also with the persecution of minorities, what we have seen with the Yazidis, with the Christians, with the Shebaks and other minorities, Turkmens in Iraq. I have visited extensively this region, and I know that destroying culture, heritage is destroying the identities of people. I always remember when I first visited Afghanistan, Kabul, I have been there several times, the inscription on the museum in Kabul, which says, "A nation stays alive when its culture stays alive." I have seen the importance of heritage preservation in the former Yugoslavia, when the bridge of Mostar was reconstructed to give a strong message of bridges between the different communities. I have seen when we have rehabilitated, reconstructed the mausoleums in Mali, and I went back also to launch them and to talk to the local communities. I had the feeling that I'm giving back their own identities. And with the rise of violent extremism, I think protection of heritage really became a security issue, apart from being a humanitarian issue. This is where the importance of several United Nations Security Council resolutions adopted unanimously by the Security Council on the illicit trafficking, Resolution 2199, adopted in January 2015, and I would say the landmark resolution in 2017 on 2347 on the link between heritage protection, peace, and security. And this is where I think we have come to understand in a much more profound way why heritage matters for different countries, for different communities. Without heritage, without knowing our past, we don't have a future. And I have always said that heritage is as much about the past as it is about the future, about diversity, about the common history. And the World Heritage List, because we are speaking a lot about World Heritage, the convention adopted in 1972 by UNESCO at that time. Soon we will have the 50th anniversary. Already there are more than 1,000 World Heritage sites on this list. This is an open book of human history and of human identity, of human diversity. And we have come to understand, and we are always, I would say, diminished if a heritage site in some other place in the world is being destroyed, because we feel connected to it. We feel that this is our common past. So this is why I believe that peace security is very much founded also on the protection of heritage. I know that culture will not bring peace, but without culture, I believe there won't be lasting peace.
Irina, thank you. That is a very clear articulation. Let me ask you something else since I have you. The United States is not currently a member of UNESCO. Could you just spend a minute making the case for why the United States should rejoin UNESCO? My colleague, Kristen Cordell, just authored a piece in foreign policy. She's a visiting fellow with my program at CSIS, making the strong case that the United States should rejoin UNESCO. Could you make briefly in 1 minute why the United States should rejoin UNESCO?
I think United States should rejoin UNESCO, not just because it's a founding member, but I believe that UNESCO and United States and American people share a lot of the common objectives and initiatives. I would just quote protection of heritage, the fight against violent extremism, through intercultural dialogue or through education of girls, which is very much UNESCO's priority. It is also about the science about the oceans. It is about our common living together. And I do believe it's also about freedom of speech, if I may, because UNESCO is the US agency that defends freedom of speech. And I remember in 2011, we had that time museum already existed, still existed in Washington. We made a big conference on the freedom of speech. And if I enumerate all this, I see a lot of common, I would say, shared objectives between the American people and UNESCO. And I think the US should rejoin UNESCO. It is in the interest of the American people as much as in the interest of UNESCO and the world.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you very much. Ambassador Raz, thank you for being here. Talk about, what does culture and cultural preservation mean for Afghanistan? What's it mean for you?
Thank you, Don. First, let me thank you for the very kind words that you shared earlier. And I have to express my gratitude for this invitation, especially to CSIS and of course, Arch International for giving me actually the chance to learn about a very extremely important topic that has been always critical for Afghanistan, but just knowing from the prestigious panel that's here today, and I feel really humbled and honored to be here. For me, and I think for every Afghan, and that's regardless of the younger generation, the older generation, man or woman, our heritage and the preservation of cultural heritage has been not only part of our history and part of our identity, but I think there is something really important and critical to that. That's a strong evidence of coexistence that existed in Afghanistan decades and centuries ago. And I think that's where, for most of us, we take so much pride to learn about that 5,000 years ago, we had a very long history of existence and civilization. And usually we compare that to where we are now, which is conflict and destruction, where we realize we once were the center of the hub for the Silk Road. And we know that through what is left to us. And to know that there was a coexistence between the Islamic civilization and Buddhism before that. So I think one of the really important elements that we always look into it is the coexistence of our diverse society. As you all know, you know it much better than I do, that it's a country, Afghanistan is a country with a diverse ethnic background. And the reason it is a diverse ethnic background, because we were the hub for the Silk Road. And by default, we had the luxury of being exposed to different cultures and traditions at the time. And we had learned, and we knew at the time how to live and respect each other. And I think it's a strong message that we must replicate once again. Second, I also think it's the identity. It goes back to that coexistence. At the end of the day, then and today, we identify ourselves as Afghans. And what it really makes us distinct in that term is it's our very long history that we have learned through school and after that, and in that it doesn't matter how much of the civil war had created division, some division to a certain level, but at the end of the day, nothing can divide us and nothing can separate us, because we have this shared history with each other and actually with the region, most importantly. And nowadays, I think it's something extremely critical, important, because we are going through an era of how connectivity once it was an important element for trade in business, and it was an important element for growth, and as all of you know, an important element for civilization, prosperity, and stability and peace. Over the years, not only in our region, in Afghanistan, but I think part of the world, we started to eliminate ourselves to specific identities and try to close ourselves and create divisions or differences. And I think we're trying to undo that once again and trying to create a greater element of connectivity and regional cooperation. So the preservation of Afghanistan's cultural heritage is, of course, an important element for Afghanistan, but it is an important element for our region. And as Irene said, I think for the world, because it is something that we just have to remind ourselves where we were and where we are. And it is really sad that we have to look back, because I think where with the younger generation, the optimism is always to look forward. But sometimes I think it's great importance that we have to humbly look back and acknowledge the prosperity and the coexistence we had then.
Thank you, Ambassador. I've been struck by the book Lost Enlightenment by Fred Starr. I'm sure you know it. I suspect the other participants on the Zoom call are familiar with Fred Starr's magisterial book, Lost Enlightenment. I couldn't put it down, and it was a revelation to me as a book. And it was about exactly this, that the most advanced civilization for several hundred years was in Afghanistan and parts of Central Asia. Now, I know that's a hard mental leap for many of the listeners, but it's true. And that is what you're referring to, Ambassador Raz, that this was the center of the most modern civilization that humankind knew at that time, was in Afghanistan and Central Asia for several hundred years. And there are enormous cultural assets from that period and previous. There's Greek civilization in Afghanistan, there's Buddhist civilization in Afghanistan, there's a very advanced Islamic civilization in Afghanistan. It's amazing. It's an amazing, amazing place. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about this. Luis Monreal, thank you for being here.
Hello.
So could you first, yes, you're on. Could you first explain what is the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and how does it fit into this conversation?
Well, I hope it fits. That's the first thing. The Aga Khan Trust for Culture is an agency of the Aga Khan Development Network, which is the largest private development organization in the world that employs about 90,000 people in different countries with Muslim or minorities or majorities of population. It is created by His Highness the Aga Khan. And the underpinnings, let's call it the ideological underpinnings of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, is that culture is a vector for development. Then cultural heritage is an economic asset. And that by dealing with preserving and giving value to cultural heritage, we are providing opportunities for social and economic development. And that's what we do in different countries. We are an organization hand-on. I am very pleased by you thinking that I am an Indiana Jones. I would like to be a young Indiana Jones, but we really work in difficult countries. Difficult because some of them are in war or post-war situations. I'm very pleased that the Afghan ambassador Raz is here. She knows very well that we've been engaged in Afghanistan because His Highness the Aga Khan is personally engaged with his community in the country since a few weeks after the fall of the Taliban regime. I arrived to Kabul the first time was on the 4th of January 2002, and the Taliban regime has disappeared a few weeks before. And we've been for the past now 18 years working with the Afghan government in what Irina was saying, in trying to preserve a cultural heritage that is not only the roots of identity, this is the basis for the understanding in these pluralistic societies that the ambassador has so well described, and that is an economic asset for the young generations in the country. So I think I will stop here, because otherwise Indiana Jones may become very oratorial and could spend all the time you want to spend in this conversation.
So talk about how, Luis, how could cultural heritage in the Afghan context be a unifying topic? Because I think about the Bamiyan Buddhas, or this famous instance where the Taliban went and blew them up. And, unfortunately there's, could you talk a little bit about how, are you hopeful it could be a source of unity for Afghanistan, Luis?
Well, let's be very frank. Afghanistan is a difficult united country because of the since the beginning has had problems to establish this bond between these very different ethnic groups, languages, and faiths. We have people that were called the unfaithful within the Afghan society. We have Shias and Sunnis. But I think the country has made a great effort in recognizing that this heritage, 5,000 years old heritage, as old as Egypt, as old as the civilizations in the Middle East. That was the origin of all our Western civilization. Well, this heritage includes what Afghanistan is today is the sum of all this heritage, and is a matter to be transmitted through education and through the evidence of the monuments that stand, and that will give pride to the different ethnic groups that they are behind the origin of those monuments. I think you are on mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute. Luis, could you talk a little bit about the role of the Aga Khan? So I know Aga Khan has been takes a very long-term view about making investments, has invested in hotels in Afghanistan, has invested in power projects in Afghanistan, and takes a 100-year view, takes a very benign, long-term developmental view. Could you talk a little bit about the role of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture in Afghanistan specifically? Just to give you a chance to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, in fact, there is a book published a few years ago, 2 years ago, that compiles the thing. If any of the people who are listening and watching this want, they can get it from us. But the first principle is, as I said, that the conservation and preservation of heritage is only a leitmotif for development. So when we enter into our historic cities program in Herat, in Kabul, or in individual monuments like in Balkh and in other areas of Afghanistan, we bring an array of means of intervention. If we talk about historic cities, we deal with infrastructure, with sewage systems, with education, with health, with women education, etc., etc. And this is not a single cultural heritage operation. The Aga Khan Trust for Culture is accompanied by the other agencies of the Aga Khan Development Network. The Aga Khan Foundation, for example, for education, the medical services, and that's why the Aga Khan Development Network, as the ambassador knows very well, has established hospitals, telecommunications, infrastructure, investment, etc., etc. Cultural heritage, I think international institutions, international organizations, and governments should think that if included in development programs, could make some of these actions, some of these strategies a lot more effective.
Thank you very much, Luis. So Irina, could you explain to me, how did cultural heritage protection become a component of the peace negotiations? Because if I understand it correctly, They are actually a part of the discussions as part of the peace negotiations among the various parties in Afghanistan?
I think it's a very important question. I think the first step indeed was to include the protection of heritage, the role of culture in the peace negotiations. And I would like really to say how happy I am to be a member of the board of Arch International, because this was the initiative of Arch International, sending a letter to both delegations, launching a petition, a public petition that has been already signed and accepted, I would say, by Afghanistan. President Ghani reacted extremely positively to this, and I would say already the momentum has been built. It is important because it is indeed about the future of Afghanistan. And if within the negotiations, within the agreements about the future of Afghanistan, the idea about protection of heritage stays, it will change, I would say, the perspective of young people thinking about the diversity of their country, about the sharing heritage with their neighbors or with some other countries. It gives a lot of sense of confidence within the people, knowing about their diverse heritage and protecting it. And the other side, of course, is something that you mentioned and also Luis mentioned. It is about jobs. It is about creating an ecosystem. It's about creating an economic environment for creative industries to develop crafts, to develop sustainable tourism around. And we all know that these are jobs that are green jobs, jobs that are local jobs. They cannot be exported. In very many cases, women take up these jobs. It creates inclusiveness within society. And on a broader, I would say, it boosts economic development of Afghanistan. So with all this, I would say, ecosystem of protection of heritage, diversity, knowledge about the past and economic drive will create a different future for Afghanistan.
Thank you, Irina. Ambassador Raz, I got a question from the audience asking you about what your hopes and concerns are of adding cultural heritage to the current peace negotiations, Ambassador Raz.
Sure, Don, before I answer the question from the audience, which I will, for sure I will, I think I wanted to go with Luis mentioned earlier. First, I think Luis was extremely humble in the work of AKTC. And I must just applaud the work of AKTC for what they have done in Afghanistan in the preservation of historical heritage and monuments in the country. His Highness had a special, how do I say, Afghanistan was really in his heart and great attention to what we have gone through. And that resulted with the great dedication of colleagues on the ground and their diplomatic representation, especially with their previous ambassador who was in Afghanistan. There is an excellent work done that every Afghan, the public is aware, informed, grateful, including the government leadership. So I just wanted to applaud such a work that has been done so far. In regards to the second comment in terms of the reason for instability is or could be because of a diverse society that we have. I just wanted to respectfully disagree with it. I think for a lot of us who know the history of Afghanistan, the differences that exist in the country is a lot with political ideology. And in most of those political ideologies are not formed around ethnicity or language or quote unquote to say differences because of our diversity. Those ethnic ideologies are a lot formed, you're to the right, to the left, or because we were a part of the Cold War, how do I say, superpowers rivalry, and we were the center of it. And then following that, I think the rise in extremism has also, Afghanistan was not protected from that. But one thing I think we take so much pride, and I think that's where our historical heritage and in our previous history helps us to even be remembered. Remember that more and more is a respect for our diversity and actually the coexistence that we have. So I think I just wanted to make that clarity, and even they, if it's Shias or Sunnis, I think it's really fortunate that compared to many countries in the region, we don't have much of that distinction. It unfortunately has been targeted recently, but it never had divided us at all. And I wanted to say that with a lot of proudness. And where we had a very dark history towards our cultural heritage, it was during the Civil War, which was looted. Like any other country that goes through a war, there is the historical pieces from the museums get looted, and that's what happened in Afghanistan. And then during the Taliban regime, which, as you all of know, with the conservative ideology they brought, they tried to destroy any piece that had imagery. So I think why the conversation today, which that's why I'm coming to the question that was raised by the audience as well. And the conversation today, and especially that ARC International took the lead on it to bring the preservation of historical heritage is an important part of the conversation within peace, because it's sad, but we know what happened during Taliban regime. The greatest Buddha was destroyed then, which was not only something for Afghanistan, but that was for the entire Buddhist civilization at the time, for region and beyond. It's something that we just had to be reminded how then architects worked, and we know a lot how in the old historical cities now that has been destroyed, the sewer system worked, or irrigation system was managed. And I think there is a lot to be learned, and I think it is a shared history for all of us. So the conversation today of protection of historical sites in the peace talks is an important element. We are thankful for the great initiative that was led by Arch International, and as Irina said, it was welcomed by the government and by the public. His Excellency the President put an official announcement in expressing the commitment of the government that this should be part of the conversation from the public's negotiating team, which it was added in the preliminary agenda that was drafted. But what I wanted to add on, that this is not the end of this talk. I think what today where we are, there is a great awareness that and any peace agreement, especially in the peace conversation of Afghanistan and knowing the history of Taliban, this is an important discussion when we talk about the preservation of the gains of last 20 years. This is one of the gains that we must protect. A lot of work has been done in last 19 years with the help of international community, and AKTC was at the lead, UNESCO was at the lead, and we must protect and expand those. There is so much that needs to be done, and the political pressure needs to arrive on Taliban. Yes, there is a commitment that the government has, there is a commitment that the Afghan public has, there is a commitment that the negotiating team has, but just knowing the very terrible history, how Taliban ruled before, I think it must be very clear to them that once they do look in the post-peace scenario in Afghanistan, their commitment to preservation of archaeological sites and historical monuments and heritage, it must be clear, and there should be no gray area in any type of definition that they may arrive, because I won't be surprised if they arrive with any type of definition. There are many Muslim countries around the world that have been able to look into this topic with good examples and great experience, and they have proceeded, and we definitely can look into those examples. So I think I'm going to say it's important, it will be important, it will not be compromised, and we are extremely grateful that this conversation is coming to the public, into the international arena as well, because there would be no single Afghan that will deny the importance of protecting our historical heritage, because that's how, as I said, that's how we look into the past, and not because, of course, the coexistence, but that's how civilization was in Afghanistan. And it's really sad for most of the younger generation. They don't know, they don't remember. And I think this is what we look into the past, and we can be proud of it.
Could you let me just push a little bit further, Ambassador, but how do you think the Taliban are going to, is it still a little unclear what their position is on cultural heritage assets?
It is pretty unclear what is their position, because and it's not only in cultural heritage. I think every sensitive issue that was brought up, where they had a different perspective when they were in power during their regime, they always have given a very gray answer. For instance, with the woman issue, the same thing, and cultural heritage as well. And but we can't. I think for all of us, we cannot let this go through the road that we were once there. And for all of you, as you may remember, when Taliban first get into power, they didn't win right away after the destruction. It took them quite some time to actually build the narrative around it. So we know the type of way how they work. They don't express their objective at the initial stage, but there must be greater clarity and proper commitment. And that commitment is not only as they being the leading power, but they will be the part of the power sharing structure that the government at the time, like today, that we are responsible. We have signed certain conventions, and we have agreements with UNESCO and AKTC and others in the ground that are helping us to protect the shared history of the world and in our region, in Afghanistan. And they must agree to those. And it must be really clear, not only through a statement, through the agreement of peace agreement written there, because that's the way we want to have the conversation very clear with them on women's rights, on human rights, on freedom of expression, political rights. And this would be one of the elements that we will bring up as well.
So, Ambassador, I'm just list some countries: Jordan with Petra, Egypt with the pyramids, Tunisia with its incredible Greco-Roman, it's primarily Roman ruins, Lebanon with its incredible assets, Syria has its own assets, though maybe that's a different case, Iraq to some extent as well, Morocco, and maybe I'm going to guess Indonesia, maybe another one. These are all Islamic countries that have, in essence, found a way to be very Islamic while also respecting these past cultural assets. Is that what you're thinking when you think about other countries in the Islamic world?
Absolutely. I think because my assumption would be they will probably come up with some type of gray definition of linking it to the religion. But Afghanistan had been a Muslim country since Islam arrived in Afghanistan. It's a Muslim country. The official religion of the state was Islam. So then we had the ability to protect. Then we had the ability to share our history with the rest of the world. It was only specifically during their regime, and we know with many very great definitions they arrived with women's education as well, and women's freedom to work outside of household at the time too. But we do have excellent examples around the world because and there are clerics that have a clear vision on how to proceed, and very clearly AKTC, it's an entity that have a footprint in most of the Muslim world where they have joined in and they have worked. So there is no excuse. That's what I wanted to mention and say. I think, and there shouldn't be any excuse at all. And in my confidence is, of course, with that we would be able to find a solution, but we should not. The government will not be pressured, the public will not be pressured, but I think our hope is also that the international community help us to build this narrative even more stronger, and the debate even in the conversation even more stronger, that they acknowledge the new Afghanistan comes with some of these critical elements, and that's just part of who we are.
And Luis, could you talk about, I'd love to hear from Luis and Irina about this issue of other Islamic countries where there's been some kind of an understanding met that the countries are very faithful Muslims and that the state religion is Islam, while at the same time protecting and respecting various cultural heritage assets. Luis, could I start with you and then Irina?
Yes, thank you. Let me have some reflections from a historian viewpoint. All religions have strikes of iconoclastia, of an iconoclasm. Let's look at Christianism. We have in the Middle Ages some Christian orders like the Cistercian. They banned the representation of human figures and animals in their cathedrals. They only had geometric decorations and vegetation. We have the iconoclasm trends in Byzantium. It means that all religions, when there are strikes of extremism, that without a solid basis, theological basis, decided that the destruction, that representation of the real world could represent for the faithful is bad. This is a problem, is a forced problem in Islam. Only like in Christianism, extreme interpretation of the faith could provoke this kind of reaction. So that's the first element of the problem. But of course, here we are talking about people with their own theologians are extreme, and it will may take forever to change their views, like it will be the case with the Wahhabi. So it's a matter of, in a country like Afghanistan, in my opinion, is a matter of how the government does, is to improve education and consolidate the rule of law and order to arrive to a situation where a majority of the citizens of the Taliban will become a marginal group with their own political ideas, but not significant for the country. I don't think you can do unless, and this is not my issue, I'm not in politics, but I think it's fundamental what the ambassador said, is that the Taliban accept, like in other areas, in the context of the peace conversations, that cultural heritage has to be respected. But there are many countries that they not even solve the problem. There are countries like Turkey that they've accepted the legacy of the past, the representation given by the Greek and Roman and previous cultures of human representations in sculptural, painting, and in other forms.
So, Irina, could you? I'd also welcome your thoughts on this issue, please.
I think what Ambassador Ras was very important. At the end of the day, Afghanistan was the quintessential meeting point of all different empires, of religions, of cultures, and this is how the today's identity of the Afghan people was formed. It is complex, it is multi-layer, and it is very important to know for very many of these countries that there is nowhere pure culture. Cultures have always influenced each other. You may see Buddhas, very early Buddhas with the hair doing the curls of Alexander the Macedonian. You could go to a beautiful mosque and see some elements of a Christian church or vice versa. And I think this is very important, that 40 years of destruction cannot in fact represent what has been the history of the Afghan people. Education is critical, and ignorance is really what breeds very much of this negative attitudes and this destruction. So I come back once again to the idea that educating young people in diversity, about history, about the very long history of their own country, about the others, it's very important. And as I said, influencing each other, creating synergies between the different cultures has been deeply embedded into the history of Afghanistan. And it should be known, it should be respected, it should be showed, and it should be embraced by the people, particularly the young people of Afghanistan.
Got it. I want you each to talk about the following, which is, what is the best case scenario for Afghanistan in terms of its cultural preservation? And what I'm thinking about is, let me just list some statistics. So in Cambodia had 5.6 million tourists. Croatia, think about Dubrovnik, had 18.5 million tourists. Colombia had 3.4 million tourists. And El Salvador had 1.5 million tourists. So could you imagine a best case scenario where we had a really big ramp up in tourism in Afghanistan? Could you talk a little bit about what that looked like? And then could you also talk about a worst case scenario? What are your fears? What's a worst case scenario? I remember very vividly the destruction of those Buddhas. I was appalled. I was profoundly offended. I was outraged. And it was a desecration. It was a global desecration. It wasn't an Afghan tragedy. It was a global tragedy. And I thank all the folks who have been in the museums in Afghanistan. There's that museum in Afghanistan where they're repiecing together parts of their culture. Those folks are heroes. Those folks are putting their, and sometimes they, I'm not sure everyone is happy about them restoring, assets and from the past. So talk about a best case scenario and talk about a worst case scenario. Maybe start with you, Irina, please.
Well, I think, of course, the best case scenario is that protection of heritage and recognition of the diversity of the Afghan people is recognized, and it's inscribed within the peace talks for the future. There is not just protection of the existing heritage, there is a lot of care for what they stand for. There is also development of cultural industries. There is education in schools about it. There is tourism, I would say sustainable tourism. I think this is also very important. And also within the economic development, sufficient attention should be put on no future destruction of heritage, because there were also some threats against it. And I would say the overall understanding on that basis to develop a new trend of cultural industries. I remember in 2016, when I was the last time in Afghanistan with President Ghani, we launched the idea of creating a national fund for culture and development, trying to protect the heritage, the religious heritage also, a lot of mosques and others which need protection, but also creating jobs for the people. What is missing, I believe, for this type of scenario is the capacity to move on. And there is a lot of need to develop this capacity for heritage protection, for tourism, for cultural industries. There should be a lot of investment in this for the future. And of course, the worst case scenario for me is additional damage, some kind of negligence of this heritage, which will be extremely detrimental to the future of the Afghan people.
Ambassador, what's your best case scenario? What's your worst case scenario for this, Ambassador?
I think I'm going to echo what Irina said. I agree 100% with her, where what would be the best case and what would be the worst. And what I would like to also add in terms of the best case is that to continue to the work that we are doing since 2001 until 2014, there had been the renovation of about 159 historical monuments and sites. And as well as additional 161 since 2014 and until now. And currently there are 18 under the under the process that the work is going on. And the president himself just recently announced full funding for the 5 minarets of Herat's Musalleh, which is another important part of the Islamic civilization in Herat. So looking into what we went through and where we are in terms of the work that has been so far done, it's pretty drastic. But it is not enough, if I may say. I think the ideal scenario is to continue to do what we are doing, to have no stop to it. I think to expand these restoration and preservations to other sites as well. It's a blessing that Afghanistan is the center of so many historical sites and World Heritage centers or sites in Afghanistan. And I think it's a very comprehensive work. It's not really small, so it will require more of our dedication, both the government and as well as the international community, and those especially who are in the forefront, like UNESCO and AKTC had been so generous to work. And I also wanted to add one more element to the work of AKTC, which I think Louise should make me their spokesperson now, the training of locals in Afghanistan because the work that AKTC has done is to train Afghans to do the restoration. So I think that is a really good example that we can look into how AKTC has done and could be replicated with other institutions who are working in Afghanistan, which is mobilizing the local ability and skill set and training them further. I think tourism is definitely something in the long run, and to be really honest, part of the best scenario. To be really honest, it's heavily dependent on security. Currently, what Afghanistan offers, it's definitely even where we stand, which we are definitely not in the complete ideal scenario of complete restorations and preservations. But even now, we offer the best sites that anyone around the world would be interested to visit and see. It's the security that's really unfortunate that we haven't been able to attract the level of tourism that we should. And I think my best scenario is to hope for a sustainable peace in Afghanistan, where people from across the world are freely able to travel. My worst case scenario is like anyone else, I think, and to be not able to move on, I think, because I don't think we're going to experience what we had experienced before. There is a great confidence that I have in my nation, in my people, in the government, and in our national security forces. There hasn't been a single incident since then, since in the last 19 years, when the public has tried to destroy an historical site. This has never happened in Afghanistan. Our dark days were during the Taliban regime, that intentionally the destruction happened. Lootation happened during civil war, but now with the strength of our security forces, those are protected. So I think my worst case scenario would be if we are not able to move on where we are. And but even that, I think I still come with great confidence and optimism that we would be able to move on. There is no need for public awareness to inform the public how important it is. And I think I can say this with confidence. With those who have been in Afghanistan, you know it, that every Afghan, the day when that Bamiyan was destroyed, they cried. And it's still a piece of pain for us when we see it. And we won't forget, and we won't let this happen again.
I pray that that's the case, Ambassador. It was I was profoundly moved, and I know millions of people were around the world, just as in Afghanistan. So I'm so happy to hear that. Louise, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario?
The best case scenario is that Ambassador Raz accepts the position as international spokesman for AKTC.
Yes,
that will solve all my problems.
Here.
But I think I could add very little, but perhaps to add some details to what both Irina and Ambassador Ras have said. First of all, the best scenario has to continue with this capacity building in Afghanistan, what we've been so much engaged for the last 18 years. But the state has a tremendously important obligation, has to create the structures and the places where the people train could have recognized job, paid to decent standards, and a kind of a sustainability. This is an effort that the government has done and needs to be continued doing in these areas of the, let's call the cultural industries. The pandemic has told us many things. One of the things is a certain prevention towards tourism. And you, Dan, you were talking about how many million tourists could Afghanistan have in the best case scenario. Not too many today, even if the security situation was resolved, because the infrastructures are not ready. And this should be a gradual process of developing infrastructures carefully, gradually, organically, to accept this tourism that will come. And not only for cultural heritage, but also for the natural heritage that Afghanistan is so rich. So the future is in the cultural economy, in the sustainable cultural industries. But it is also necessary to bring the private sector into the picture. AKTC is a private sector that is working efficiently in a public-private agreement basis with the government. This is an example that the government could also exploit in the future in the areas of cultural heritage and in other areas for non-profit. But the worst case scenario will be a continuously divided country with Taliban occupied zones where cultural heritage could continue to be massacred, something that in fact could be even a minor thing compared with the human drama that exists in the, or may exist in the Taliban occupied zones. I think this is for me the worst case scenario, but I'm full of hope that this is not going to be the case. And I would like to thank Ambassador Ras, because she has mentioned this fifth minaret of the Goshardar Madrasa in Herat, which President Ghani has given us the honor and given us the confidence and the responsibility as the AKTC group to try to salvage this important piece of architecture, which is really in critical condition by neglect and by lack of attention during the past decades. We will try to do our best, but here we are engaged in one of the most critical conservation projects we have never undertook, not in Afghanistan, anywhere in the world. So thank you very much. Transmit, please, to His Excellency, the President, my gratitude.
I want to thank Irina Bokova. I want to thank Ambassador Raz. I want to thank Luis Monreal. I want to thank my friends at Arch International. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Sophia. I think, look, this is, I want to remain optimistic. I believe that Afghanistan has, if we can get peace, it can be a much more prosperous country. Culture and tourism and the creative economy can all be one of the pillars of a new Afghanistan. The other ones would be agribusiness. Another one would be around ICT. Another one would be around mining and natural resources. There is an enormous amount of mineral wealth in Afghanistan. So there are other opportunities as well. This is a great country with a huge youth bulge that needs jobs. And so what I've said to folks in countries that don't necessarily wish Afghanistan well, what we've done a lot of research on this is that if things don't go well, I've said to military officials in other countries, I said, is it a win for your country if you get 5 or 6 million refugees? And they look at me and they get very uncomfortable because they know that's not a win for them. We need to focus on the positive and the chance for peace. And I hope that as part of the process that the cultural assets, which are an important source of jobs and growth in the future, in addition to being a potentially unifying set of assets and a bridge to the past and a bridge to the future, are protected. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I want to thank our speakers and I thank our friends at Arch International. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.